Just so that you know, Loudoun, if you haven't figured this out already, is very much a Twitter county. So if you have a Twitter account, please feel free to tweet out about your learning to at Markel Atkins, at LCPS official, hashtag co-teaching. And just so you know, we're going to be talking today about the co-teaching partnership. So we're going to talk about the different models of co-teaching, as well as how to start building those relationships with your co-teacher. So our agenda for tonight, first we're going to briefly discuss the benefits of co-teaching. Then we're going to talk about the different 6 co-teaching models. We're going to go in depth with 4 of them, and I'll explain why only 4 when we get to that part. And then we're going to have I'm going to share some documents with you to help you build the relationship with your co-teacher, because it really is a partnership with each other, and being able to trust each other and respect each other and plan together. And then finally, we'll have wrap up and review, and then any questions that you may have. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of co-teaching. So first of all, it definitely allows you to have more diversity in your instructional styles within the class. It helps you with flexible seating, flexible grouping. It's another set of eyes to help you problem solve ways that students might learn, or issues that you're having with students. It can help with classroom management because it decreases the teacher to student ratio. And it also helps to engage the students because you've got those 2 teachers, licensed teachers in the room working on instruction together and helping take care of the students together. So there are 6 co-teaching models. You can read them here on the screen. One Teach, One Assist is one of the ones I'm just going to mention briefly, and you will have videos of it that you can watch later to see. But it's really a model that you shouldn't be using a whole lot. It's what we often start the year off with if we're not familiar with our co-teacher, but it really isn't getting as much bang for the buck. Like the students aren't getting as much assistance when the co-teacher is just handing out papers or helping with kind of just outside tasks like that. There is a time for it, and it definitely can be mixed in and be one of the things that you use, one of the models you use, but it should only be for brief parts of time. Also, One Teach, One Observe. I'm going to say the same thing for that. There is definitely a sound use for that. And the biggest time that I used this one was collecting data, especially if you have a child in child study or a student that has an IEP, or you're trying to collect information to fill out their EL apps for testing accommodations. That's where you would use the One Teach, One Observe, and it would just be one teacher's teaching the class, and the co-teacher, and it could be either one of you, the co-teacher is actually taking down data on a student or a small group of students. That's something that you would use for a short amount of time, maybe one day here and there. But again, those are 2 that we're not going to go into depth with tonight. You can watch the videos later because it's not really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. That being said, the 4 we're going to focus on are station teaching, parallel teaching, alternative differentiated teaching, and team teaching. So I'm going to take just a minute to show you a 2 to 3 minute video on each of these. And afterwards, I'm going to kind of discuss with you how I've used it and other ways that you might use it within your class.
In this strategy, station teaching, the co-teachers divide their class into small groups to provide instruction at separate stations.
Station teaching is a chance for 2 teachers to work together and provide some individualized attention to smaller groups of students while covering several different pieces of the curriculum.
Sharon and Jan have divided their class into 4 small groups, and those groups rotate between specific stations, each station presenting different but often related content. Jan will teach Station 1, and Sharon will teach Station 3. At Stations 2 and 4, students will work independently, with both teachers monitoring their progress.
When you can get them in these groups, you can employ a lot of different strategies. For one thing, it's more sort of 1-on-7, which makes it more manageable. But the other thing is we can strategize who we put in the groups.
We can also group by ability. So I can take some extra time with a group who maybe has fewer skills, and I can let the more independent learners work on their own. So it allows us to split our groups up into a variety of different configurations.
After a designated amount of time at each station, the groups will rotate.
And the nice thing about working with stations is we can really modify the curriculum to match what our students need, because it's much smaller pieces. It's not an hour of one topic, it's several small topics in shorter amounts of time.
Station teaching reduces the student-teacher ratio, increasing student participation and effective monitoring of the students.
I think you can also identify and feed into the curiosity of students better when you're in exploration stations, because you can actually see right in front of you somebody kind of, oh, this is grabbing my interest, and you can kind of run with that and make an educational moment out of it, and also a memorable moment and an engagement moment.
Since this is a highly engaging instructional format, teachers may need to manage the noise level in the classroom. To be effectively implemented, the activities at each station should function independently of each other and should require roughly the same amount of time to be completed. It is recommended that this strategy be used frequently to enhance learning outcomes.
Something that's really important to me as a teacher, I feel like the kids are being heard in the small groups a little bit more, because everybody gets a chance to speak.
There's a lot of different models we can follow, but it's always together, and it's always with each other in mind and our students first.
Okay, so with station teaching, it's actually one of my favorite co-teaching models, especially for new co-teaching pairs that maybe don't know each other as well just yet. What I really like about it is it gives each of you a piece to teach and a piece to focus on, and then maybe there's another group that's doing independent. I understand that this showed elementary, but like I said, I taught middle school, which I've mostly taught 8th grade, and I've seen this work very effectively in high school, where one teacher usually, so I co-taught Algebra 1, so I'm going to use that as an example. So the co-teacher and I would kind of figure out which ones that I would be in charge of. So usually he was doing more of the first instruction, like the first time that it's been heard. And then I would be in a group where I was doing a spiral activity. So that way I'd seen the material already before. I was comfortable with it. And now I was able to kind of work with the students to have them practice some more. And then we would have a group by themselves, either working on Desmos or working on Delta Math, something like that. So, and then the students would rotate around to the 3 different groups. Another way that we use this is we would use it for test review. So the co-teacher and I would decide, like he would make packets on the different topics for test review, and we would decide which ones I was more comfortable with as the co-teacher. He would do the other ones, and then we would have them kind of go around in groups again. So that way it was a smaller number of students doing the test review, and that way they were more likely to ask questions, especially if it was something that they were struggling with. And so again, he would have a packet that he would be working with the students or an activity. I would have a group of students that I was working with a packet or an activity. And then there would be some kind of independent practice for them to do as well. Maybe they're getting on Alex or Delta Math again, or something like that, Khan Academy. Another way that I used this was in the 8th grade science class that I co-taught, where I would do the station with vocabulary review. So the teacher might take a group and would be teaching them the content, or maybe getting them started on a lab. And I would do vocabulary review with another group. And then there maybe would be a group that had already started on the lab on their own that was working independently. So again, station teaching is a little bit easier to facilitate when you first start out, because you're both pulling from your strengths and you're both doing different things with different groups of students. So it gives you a chance to kind of get to know each other a little bit more. The next one that I'm going to talk about is parallel teaching. So first I'll show you the video, and then I'll discuss some ways that I've used this in the past.
In the parallel teaching strategy, the co-teachers divide the class in half and instruct them on the same material.
Parallel teaching is teaching the same lesson with half as many students. We divide that up so that children have more airtime and more teacher attention. Really draws them closer to the subject area that they need to be engaged in.
So we go from 22 students down to 11 students in each group.
The primary benefit of this approach is that the student-to-teacher ratio is reduced, thereby allowing the co-teachers to maximize participation and minimize behavior problems during teaching.
It allows for better thought out answers. The children have more time to think about it. And one of the things I like about it too is that some kids, they kind of want to hide. And when we have them in a smaller group like this, there's less chance for them to hide. It's just nicer always having a smaller group to be able to have more rich discussion and vocabulary from the students.
In this class, co-teachers John and Michael are using table groupings to divide up their classroom. This will reduce the student-teacher ratio, and it will also increase instructional intensity.
The table groupings aren't random. They're grouped according to kind of a heterogeneous grouping so that we have a good mix of EL students and higher and lower performing students.
With this approach, teachers will have to maintain control over the noise level so that the groups do not get distracted. In addition, timing is a critical part of this strategy because both teachers need to take roughly the same amount of time to complete the instructional segment. Teachers should try to use this strategy more frequently to allow for maximum student participation in the learning.
Usually when we're doing parallel teaching, that time can vary, but the attention span of a kindergartner is relatively short. And so from start to finish, you're looking at about 15 minutes.
Parallel teaching's a great methodology when you want to focus on a deeper instruction or deeper learning just because of the small group.
We're able to pay closer attention to the details and catch kids before they fall out the bottom. For today's purposes, we found it most convenient to divide up in those familiar groups that they normally work in, and it works very quickly and they're right at home.
Okay, so parallel teaching definitely needs a higher level of trust between the co-teaching teams and does take more planning. And hopefully you have some common planning time, or you've set up a time after school where you can touch base and plan together to look at some of these things. With parallel teaching, you're both teaching exactly the same lesson. It's exactly the same thing, but you're going to separate those students into two. And so I've done this before with a science lesson when I really wanted to kind of take the EL and maybe some of the lower students that were struggling a little bit and teach them myself so that I could make sure that I was giving them the scaffolding that they needed in order to understand the lesson. And then the content teacher maybe took the other students and did the lesson with still scaffolding, but maybe they didn't require as much scaffolding. The most important thing, like they said, is that you need to be able to finish around the same time. And this wouldn't necessarily be the entire block. This could just be maybe a 30-minute, 20 or 30-minute chunk of the block, where maybe this is where you're going to start off with the direct instruction and have both of you working with the students. It usually works best to have the students' backs to each other and the teachers facing each other. So the teachers are facing this way because that way it's a little less distracting for the students. You do have to be careful of your volume, especially since most of us have very bold teacher voices. You've got to kind of keep that in mind as you're working with parallel teaching. But again, you're still in the same room. You're just breaking the students into two groups and giving them the direct instruction with smaller groups so that you're better able to see what the students are doing and try to engage them more. All right, now we're going to watch the video on alternative teaching. It's similar to parallel teaching with just one difference. Of course, now my videos are reloading. There we go.
In this co-teaching approach, alternative or differentiated teaching, one teacher manages a large group of students, while the other takes a small group for a specific instructional purpose. In this particular teaching sample, a resident is managing the large group and a mentor is managing the small group, but their roles can be switched.
Alternative differentiated instruction is taking a small group of students separate from whole class, and you're either teaching them the same content material, or you use that small group away from whole class to provide intervention for students who might not have learned a concept previously.
It could also be used for enrichment for students who already have the concept, and we just want to take them a little bit farther than the other students are ready for.
This approach provides instructional flexibility and can be used for enrichment, remediation, assessment, or pre-teaching, as well as for alternative methods of providing lesson input.
We can reteach, we can enrich the students' needs, we can also do behavior modifications, and give the students the specific support they need to personalize their instruction.
When we plan an alternative lesson, like if a student is struggling in math and she was the one to initially teach the concept, and she was the one to notice a student who was struggling in that area, we might have her teach the concept in the small group. Or we might think, you know what, the student needs a completely different method of learning about this. So then I might be teaching the small group in order to just provide a different way of looking at things.
If I have a stronger connection with the student, it might actually be a good plan for her to have the small group to make those connections with the students too. So then in the long run, we're both connected with all of our students.
Teachers using this strategy will want to pull students for a variety of purposes so that this approach does not create a situation in which those instructed using this format feel labeled or stigmatized in any way.
They do wonder why they're chosen sometimes, so we've explained to them that all students have different needs. And they understand that. They realize as the school year goes along, we have a very safe classroom environment and we're all here to learn. And so everyone seems fine with when they're pulled back and when they're not pulled back.
This co-teaching approach should be used occasionally when it is needed to increase the performance of particular students or groups of students.
With differentiated instruction, I feel like I can really reach my students' specific needs. I really get to know the students and I can zero in on exactly what they need me to help them with. With a small group, they can feel like they're being heard and they can feel safe to ask questions to allow for their best understanding of the content.
To a teacher that is looking to use alternative instruction for their students, I think it's wonderful, and especially with the co-teaching model, having someone else in the classroom who can support you in noticing the gaps in students' learning or the students who need to have that enrichment.
Let me pause it. There we go. So the difference between parallel and alternative is with parallel, you're both teaching the same thing, but with alternative, you're teaching two different things. Now, it could be you're still on the same topic, but one of them is more like a remediation and the other is an extension activity. So ways that I've used this before was in the Algebra 1 class that I was in. I would take the students who were struggling with a topic and I would pull them to the side or to the back and we would work on practicing that topic. I would reteach that topic and we'd work on getting them to mastery. Well, my co-teacher would actually pull the students who already had mastered it and would take them a little further, would give them an activity to do with it, maybe a project or some kind of activity that was going to take them deeper into learning about what they'd already mastered. So it's a great opportunity to be able to differentiate within the class. One thing that they mention in there that I really want to make sure I emphasize is that you don't have the same set of students all the time. And I think that's really important for co-teachers to understand, that it's not my students and your students, they're all our students. And so there may be something that maybe an EL student masters and picks up really quickly. So they're going to go with the content teacher to get that enrichment activity. And there may be an academic student that doesn't get the topic and they're really struggling, and they're going to come with me as the EL teacher for the remediation. So those groups are definitely going to be fluid and changing throughout the school year based on students' needs, and you would base that on your formative data. The last one that we're going to talk about today is team teaching.
In this approach, team teaching, both teachers are often in front of the classroom sharing the responsibilities of lead instruction.
An example of collaboration, because we expect our kids to collaborate so often together, and they don't have a model of that a lot of times in a classroom that only has one teacher. And when we can work together to team teach, we can show how to collaborate so that when we ask them to go work with partners or with groups, they have an example of how to do that.
Another variation of team teaching is when both co-teachers have different but equally active roles in a lesson. One teacher might lead the discussion, and the other teacher might record notes on the overhead projector.
And then if she is up there teaching and I know that they're not understanding it, it's easy for me to say, you, come with me, and we go to the side. And I would redo the same thing.
It's reteaching right there exactly the step that they're being confused on so that they can have that deeper grow from that understanding right then.
Both teachers are fully engaged in lesson delivery. The teachers must also work well together in terms of gauging their contributions so that lesson pacing is maintained.
When I'm up there, I forget, my detail, my examples. When we team plan, she remembers there or something and she'll bring it up.
Then we can kind of check each other in a way that's positive without going, oh no.
This approach can be energizing. There is often an entertainment factor present as the teachers interact with one another, and this often increases student attentiveness and engagement. When this strategy is used, the instructional conversations and the sharing of question asking and answering can benefit students as they hear different styles of thinking.
There's something that they don't understand. There's one of us roaming around, so scaffolding is happening all the time. It's easier, and the opportunity for the students to ask us questions is just a lot easier for them.
And I think being able to say things in different ways, if I think about something in a different way and I'm able to express that to the students, and then Mei Lee can say it the way she's done it, so we're reaching a larger number of our class.
In addition, teachers are able to emphasize their strengths in a lesson segment, and teacher creativity is often enhanced using this approach.
Most of the time we actually just plan the lesson first and then decide who wants to do what part depending on our strengths. If it's something that I feel that she's better at, she can do more of the direct instruction. But most of the time, if it's a team teaching task, then it's usually half and half.
This strategy should be used occasionally, as some of the more subtle student needs can be missed when grouping is not being used.
It's supporting student learning, just being able to model collaboration and model working together, and showing that it's okay that if you forget, it's okay to have somebody support you and have your back.
Okay, so with team teaching, or sometimes you'll hear it called teaming, that's really where you're both teachers in the room and you're both kind of feeding off of each other. Maybe you're both giving examples. Maybe you notice that some of the students are struggling, so either you're going to pull them aside and reteach them, or you can give a signal to the co-teacher by asking a question. So, Miss Gardner, I really didn't understand what you were talking about with cell division. Can you go over that again and explain that a little more slowly? So you're kind of giving that clue or that cue to your co-teacher that, oh, wait a minute, they might have missed this. Let's back up and do it again. So it's really both of you taking responsibility for the classroom as professional teachers. I will say it takes a very, very strong trust in each other to get to the point of teaming, especially content teachers who have been teaching for a while. They may worry that the specialist doesn't know the content well enough. And so that's why it's important that you start building that relationship up so that that trust is there. All right. So as I mentioned, it's super important that you and your co-teacher build that relationship, build that partnership with each other. And there are lots of ways to do that, and it's never too late to start. But one of the resources that I really like is called Opening Up the Discussion. I'm going to drop that link in the chat. So these are just some discussion questions. Now, you don't have to have all of these questions at the same time. You don't have to go through all of them at all. Like, you could pick and choose, go through and decide which ones you think are the most important. But it's really a great idea to talk about teaching styles as well as like pet peeves. What do you like? What do you not like? And the reason I say that is when I was co-teaching my first year, I was with a history teacher. And for her, she was quite old school, and she felt that students should show up prepared for class with all of their materials, which meant that if they didn't have a pencil or they didn't have something they needed, she was going to do a referral, or she was going to give them lunch detention, or there was going to be some kind of a consequence. Well, for me, it's not as big a deal. If somebody doesn't have a pencil, I'm just going to give them a pencil. But obviously, if that's something that is very important to her, we needed to have this discussion, because if I'm just standing there handing out pencils when she feels students should be responsible, then that could cause problems, right? I might upset her, and then we could get frustrated with each other because we're at different ends of the spectrum on this issue. So instead, ahead of time, when she shared that with me, I said, well, listen, my students often don't have their supplies. Sometimes it's for lack of money. Sometimes they got up late that day, or maybe they had to take care of their siblings and get them breakfast in the morning. And I said, so I'm happy to give them pencils. Would it be okay with you if I stand outside of the classroom and give them a pencil as they come in? She said, hey, as long as they're coming into the room ready to go, I have no issue with that. I said, okay. So I would stand at the door every day with my pencil, with my group of pencils, and hand them out to any students that needed it. Now, it wasn't just my EL kids. Of course, there were other students that needed it, but that wasn't a big deal for me. And I could go to Dollar Tree, or I could, get pencils on sale. And it wasn't the battle that I wanted to choose to fight. So, but if we hadn't had that discussion ahead of time, it really could have ended up putting some kind of issue with our relationship. And what really matters is the students and their learning, not whether they have a pencil or not how either of us feels about it, but are the students learning? So this is a great tool to use to kind of help you get an idea of what do they know about co-teaching? What are their expectations of you as a co-teacher? And for you to share your expectations as a co-teacher. This is what I'm comfortable with right now, because as special learning specialists, whether we be EL or SPED, we are meant to be specialists on EL. So language specialists, or specialists on special education, differentiation specialists, where the content teachers are expected to know the content. My first year here, my background is in math and science, and I was put in all history classes. I don't know history. History was like the subject that made me want to cry when I was in school. So I wasn't going to be great at necessarily teaching them the subject, but I definitely could provide ideas for scaffolding and differentiation. I could teach them vocabulary using appropriate strategies. I could provide insight in how tests should be created and what those should look like. So we both had our skills, but we were able to sit down and talk about that ahead of time so that we both knew what our roles were and what the expectation was. Now, it's great if you get put in a co-teaching situation where you are comfortable. The next years after that, I was put in math science classes, and it was even more dynamic and powerful, because I was able to actually teach the content myself, as well as provide scaffolding and differentiation and ways to adjust the assessments. So again, you're not always going to be put in that situation that's a perfect fit, but you always bring something to the table and you both are professional teachers. So using these questions to kind of talk to each other ahead of time and be like, okay, what can we figure out from this? What can we learn about each other? And then how can we move forward? And again, remembering that it's about the students and keeping the students at the forefront of those discussions. The co-teaching checklist, the way I've used this before with my teachers is I would print a copy for myself and I'd print a copy for my co-teacher, and I'd ask them to go through it and check the columns. So as you can see, I'll give you a second to get that open. It really is looking at all of the important pieces of co-teaching and then saying yes or no, we're doing it. So for example, we share the responsibility for how student learning is assessed. Are you both looking at the tests? Yes or no? We've regular scheduled times to meet. Have we figured out a time that we can have some common planning with each other, even if maybe that's not during the school day, which is pretty common in Loudoun County that we don't always have common planning with our co-teacher. Do we have a process for resolving disagreements with each other? We communicate our needs to our administrator. So again, this is the way I've always used this activity. Now you could do it together and have that discussion. I've done it separately where we each fill out the yes, no, and then we come together and we talk about it. And we talk about the no's and we talk about the yeses, and we say, okay, so here's some areas where it looks like we're doing really well. And here's some areas where I think we have growth. Let's make a plan. How can we improve this? What do we want to do in order to give feedback to each other? How do we want to approach that? Because it's important for all of us to be able to receive feedback so that we can grow and make sure that we're really meeting the best needs of our students. And I can't say this enough. Any conversation you have with your co-teacher needs to have the students at the center. I noticed that 17 of the 20 students got question number 3 wrong. Let's talk about why this would be. How can we reteach this? What supports can we provide to make sure? How can we scaffold their learning to make sure that they master this topic? I noticed that the students seem to be struggling with some of the vocabulary. How can we work together to plan lessons to make sure that we're covering that important vocabulary, but always keeping the students as the focus. This doesn't have anything to do with me or my feelings or your co-teacher and their feelings. We're both professionals and we're there to do a job to make sure that these students' needs are met. And that being said, it is much more effective if you do get along with your co-teacher and you do like your co-teacher and enjoy working with your co-teacher. But in the end, it's about being professional and making sure that we're taking care of our students' needs. So just quickly as a review and wrap up, co-teaching puts 2 expert teachers, not a teacher and a teacher assistant. It's 2 expert teachers in the room to support student needs. They have a content teacher and a learning specialist. Both teachers are responsible for all of the students' learning. It's not my students and your students. They're all our students, and we're responsible for all of them. And we also need to always remember to keep students' needs at the center of all discussions.